He always swallowed his pride until tonight. It started as a normal family dinner, laughter, clinking glasses, warm conversations. But then she made him the joke again, just like always. The room filled with uneasy chuckles, stolen glances, and his silent humiliation. Only this time, something was different. His stare wasn't empty, it was steady, unshaken. Something had shifted. From this moment on, the game changed. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as every like truly inspires me. Please tell me which city and country you watched this video from. Now, let's get started. Thanksgiving was supposed to be an evening of gratitude, a time to sit among family, share a meal, and reflect on the blessings in our lives. As I took my place at the dinner table, surrounded by familiar faces, I had no reason to expect anything different. The night had unfolded pleasantly so far, filled with warm conversation, laughter, and the comforting clatter of silverware against plates. I was mid-conversation with my brother-in-law, when my wife's voice sliced through the hum of chatter, playful yet pointed. "Oh, please," she teased with a knowing smirk. "You should count yourself lucky. At least you have something interesting going on." I wish I could say the same about our bedroom. For a moment, the room froze. Then came the scattered, uneasy laughter, some genuine, others forced. A few guests shifted in their seats, suddenly preoccupied with their drinks, while others exchanged amused glances. The weight of her words settled over me, deliberate and sharp. She had turned me into the evening's entertainment, using my humiliation as the punchline to her joke. My face burned, but I willed myself to remain composed. I scanned the room, taking in the mix of amusement and discomfort. Some people avoided my gaze altogether, while others awaited my reaction with veiled anticipation. I could have responded right then, but to what end? A confrontation in front of everyone would only make things worse. Instead, I lifted my glass, took a slow sip, and acted as though the remark had barely registered. Yet deep inside, something shifted. This wasn't a careless slip of the tongue. It wasn't an innocent joke. It was intentional. And worse, it wasn't the first time. I thought back to all the moments before this one, similar digs, not as blatant, but just enough to erode my dignity bit by bit. She never did it in private, always in front of an audience, whether it was family, friends, or even co-workers. It was a routine of hers, a way to diminish me while others looked on. And every time, I had let it pass. But tonight felt different. The evening carried on, but I no longer felt present. I laughed when it was expected, responded when necessary, but my mind was elsewhere. I observed her as she moved through the night with ease, acting as though nothing had happened, as though my embarrassment was just a fleeting joke she had already forgotten. When dinner ended and guests began gathering their things, I mechanically went through the motions, stacking plates, collecting empty glasses. She remained carefree, still engaged in conversation, unbothered by the moment that had unraveled earlier. It meant nothing to her. To me, it meant everything. As the last guest stepped out and the door shut behind them, the house fell into silence. The warmth of the gathering faded, leaving behind only the remnants of the evening, half-filled glasses, discarded napkins, the faint echoes of conversation still lingering in the air. Standing at the sink, I let the water run over my hands, my mind replaying the dinner table scene on a loop. I waited for her to acknowledge it, an apology, a simple recognition, but she said nothing. She entered the kitchen, humming lightly as she gathered dishes, utterly unfazed. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and finally broke the silence. "Did you really have to say that?" My voice was steady, measured. She barely spared me a glance. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. It was just a joke. Just a joke." I exhaled slowly, nodding. "Right. A joke. So, making me look like a fool in front of everyone, that's funny to you?" She rolled her eyes, setting the glasses in the sink. No one cared. You're acting like I said something terrible." People laughed. It wasn't that big of a deal. I clenched my jaw, studying her indifference. No one cared? Maybe not. But I did. I could have argued, could have reminded her that this wasn't the first time, but I stopped myself. What was the point? She wasn't listening. She never listened. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine, took a sip, and shrugged. "You always make a big deal out of nothing." There it was again. Her ability to twist the narrative, to make it seem like I was the one overreacting. For years, I had let it slide. The subtle insults, the dismissiveness, the way she brushed me off whenever I tried to express myself. But something about tonight was different. I didn't argue. I didn't try to make her understand. I simply watched her for a moment, then turned and walked out of the kitchen. Upstairs, I loosened my tie and sat on the edge of the bed. The house was still, but my thoughts weren't. Her words echoed in my mind, along with the realization of how effortlessly she had made me into a joke, so confident that I wouldn't push back. And for a long time, she had been right. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked exhausted, but there was something else in his eyes, a shift, a clarity, a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to let this go, not this time. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I made no effort to rouse her, nor did I glance in her direction as I dressed and quietly stepped out of the bedroom. There was no point in rehashing last night's argument. She had already made it crystal clear how little it meant to her. Skipping my usual routine of brewing coffee and scrolling through emails, I grabbed my keys and walked straight out the door. I didn't linger in the kitchen, didn't pause to check my phone. Instead, I drove directly to the gym, a place I hadn't set foot in for months, maybe even longer. Life had a way of pulling me away, drowning me in work, responsibilities, and a marriage where I felt more like an afterthought than a partner. But as I stood outside that building, a sudden realization struck me. I hadn't just neglected my body. I had let go of myself entirely. Determined to change that, I signed up for a membership and got to work. The first few sessions were brutal. My muscles screamed in protest, my breath faltered faster than I remembered, and every workout left me utterly exhausted. But I kept going. This wasn't just about getting in shape, it was about reclaiming control. Every drop of sweat, every burning repetition, it was proof that I was taking something back. Beyond the gym, I started making other changes, small ones at first. I swapped my worn-out jeans and loose-fitting t-shirts for clothes that actually fit. Instead of the usual quick trim, I visited a proper barber. I straightened my posture, became more aware of how I moved, how I carried myself. I didn't announce any of it. I wasn't doing it for her, but I noticed when she started to take notice. At first it was subtle, a longer glance when I walked through the door, a lingering gaze as I moved past her. She didn't say much, but there was a shift, something unspoken hanging between us. I didn't stop. I pushed harder at work, took on projects I once shied away from, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself of what I was capable of. I reconnected with old friends, made plans without waiting for her input, without checking if it fit into her schedule. For years, I had structured my life to accommodate hers. Not anymore. Now, I was living for me. One evening, after a workout, I walked into the kitchen to grab some water. She was at the table, phone in hand, but the moment she saw me, she set it down and tilted her head. "You've been going to the gym a lot lately." Her voice was casual, but something else lurked beneath it. I twisted off the cap of my water bottle and took a slow sip. "Yeah." She waited, expecting me to elaborate. When I didn't, she let out a forced laugh. "What brought that on?" Leaning against the counter, I shrugged. Felt like it was time for a change. For the first time in a long time, I saw something new in her expression. Uncertainty. I let the silence stretch between us before taking another sip and walking past her, leaving her sitting there, wondering what was coming next. In the weeks that followed, I stayed the course. I didn't slow down. I didn't offer explanations. I wasn't looking for her validation, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. She became more observant, her eyes following me when I walked through the door, stealing glances at my phone whenever it buzzed. She tossed out casual remarks about how I seemed different. But this wasn't an act. I was different. I wasn't waiting for her approval anymore. At first, she pretended it didn't faze her, but I could tell it did. One evening, as I was getting dressed to go out, something I rarely did without checking with her first, she leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Where are you going?" Her voice was neutral, but the tension in her posture gave her away. I fastened the last button on my shirt without looking up. "Out." "With who?" I reached for my watch and secured it around my wrist. "Some friends from work." She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You never used to go out like this." I met her gaze in the mirror and nodded. "Yeah, I guess I didn't." Her lips pressed into a tight line. She wasn't used to this, to me being unpredictable, unavailable. She had always been the one in control, the one setting the terms. Now, the balance had shifted. A few nights later, as I sat on the couch responding to messages, she settled beside me. "You've been really busy lately." Her voice was softer than usual. I nodded. "Yeah." She hesitated, then spoke again. "You know, if something's wrong, you can talk to me." I almost laughed. Now, she wanted to talk. After years of dismissing my concerns, brushing off every attempt I made to tell her how I felt, suddenly, she cared. Not because she had changed, but because she could sense it, something slipping through her fingers. I didn't fall for it. I didn't reassure her. I didn't pretend everything was fine. I simply met her eyes for a moment, then turned back to my phone. That silence spoke louder than any words could. After that, she started trying harder. Small gestures at first, cooking more often, bringing up memories from when we were happy, suggesting outings to places we hadn't visited in years. She acted as if we could slip back into the old routine, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, because this time, I wasn't the one waiting. I had stopped playing the game. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she reached for my hand, something that hadn't happened in what felt like forever. I didn't pull away, but I didn't grip hers in return either. For the first time in ages, I wasn't the one chasing. After that night, her change in demeanor became glaringly obvious. She started making an effort, not out of love or genuine care, but out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of no longer holding all the power. Suddenly, she was handing out compliments, something she hadn't bothered with in a long time. "You look good today," she said one morning, studying me like I was someone unfamiliar, someone she was trying to figure out. I acknowledged it with a nod. "Thanks." No excitement, no eagerness, just a neutral response. Her messages became more frequent. She wanted to know my plans, asked when I'd be home. Before, she hardly noticed when I worked late. Now, she was suddenly invested in my whereabouts. One evening, as I was tying my sneakers for the gym, she leaned against the doorway, watching me. "You've really stuck with this whole workout thing," she noted. I shrugged. "Yeah." She hesitated before asking, "Are you doing it for someone?" I paused, meeting her eyes. There was something different in her tone. Uncertainty, maybe even insecurity. It was written all over her face. She was trying to decipher whether I had moved on, if there was someone else. I let the silence linger before finally standing, grabbing my keys and saying, "I'm doing this for me." And that was the truth. She didn't like that answer. What she wanted was reassurance, something to anchor her, to restore her sense of control. But I wasn't offering that. After that, her efforts escalated. One evening, she cooked my favorite meal, something she hadn't done in years. The table was set, candles flickered, and she even poured my drink before I sat down. I took a bite. It tasted just as good as it always had, but I wasn't going to pretend that any of this changed anything. "This is nice," I said, my voice unreadable. Relief washed over her face. "I thought it would be. I know things have been off, but maybe we just need to spend more time together." I let her talk, let her explain how things could be fixed. But as her words continued, it became clear. This wasn't an apology. There was no acknowledgement of the part she had played in all of this. She wasn't trying to mend what had been broken. She just wanted to rewind, to return to how things used to be. And I had no interest in that. That night, she reached for my hand again. I allowed it, but I didn't hold on. Because I understood something she hadn't grasped yet. I wasn't the same man she had worn down over the years, and I had no intention of becoming him again. The shift between us was undeniable now. She felt it, just as I did. The difference was, I had come to terms with it. She was still resisting. She started planning spontaneous outings, dinner reservations, weekend trips, things that had never been priorities for her before. She was desperate to bring back a version of us where she had control. But that version of me no longer existed. One evening, she came home early to find me sitting in the living room, a book in my hands. She sat across from me, fidgeting slightly. "I was thinking," she began, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "maybe we should go on a trip. Just the two of us. Get away for a bit." I closed the book and met her gaze. "Why now?" She forced a small smile and shrugged. "I just think we need it." Need it. I knew what she meant. She needed it. She needed to believe she could still pull me back in, that gestures like this could patch over the cracks. But I wasn't interested in pretending. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. Her smile wavered. "Why not?" I exhaled slowly, setting the book aside. "Because I'm done." The words hung heavy between us, immovable. She blinked as if trying to process them. "Done with what?" she asked, her voice quieter now. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Done with this. Done pretending that the past didn't matter. Done overlooking the way she had treated me for years. Done being someone she could disregard until it suited her to pull me back in. Her expression hardened. "So that's it? You're just walking away from us?" A quiet chuckle escaped me as I shook my head. "You walked away a long time ago. The only difference is, now I finally see it." She opened her mouth, as if ready to argue, but then shut it. Maybe she knew I was right. Maybe she was too tired to fight anymore. She sat there in silence for a long moment, before swallowing hard and nodding. "So what now?" I exhaled deeply as I pushed myself upright. It was time to move forward, and so I did. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of practicalities, sorting through the remnants of a life I was leaving behind, making arrangements, and reshaping my future without her in it. But the reality? I had been letting go long before our final conversation ever took place. The moment she humiliated me in front of everyone at Thanksgiving, something inside me cracked. From that day onward, every choice I made, every step I took, was a deliberate move toward something better. A life where I was no longer defined by her opinions. A life where, for the first time in years, I put myself first. So, if you're wondering what exactly happened on that infamous Thanksgiving, let me tell you, the divorce was an absolute storm. Lawyers, disputes, the exhausting process of dividing a life we had once shared. It unraveled exactly as you'd expect from a marriage that had already been disintegrating long before we had the courage to say it out loud. She didn't take it well. Initially, she wore a mask of indifference, pretending none of it mattered. But that illusion didn't last. The anger came next, the accusations, the sudden, desperate attempt to salvage what she had spent years dismantling. But by then, it was too late. The damage was beyond repair. Walking away was painful, but staying would have destroyed me. Now, I live on my own terms. No more censoring my words, No more carefully navigating someone else's emotional minefield. No more being the object of her contempt. I rebuilt myself, not for revenge, not to prove anything, but because I deserve a life beyond the one I left behind. So if you're sitting there, wondering if reclaiming your dignity is worth the struggle, let me tell you without a doubt, it absolutely is. This story has come to an end. Sometimes we get used to enduring, turning a blind eye, and justifying those who diminish us. But respect is not something you can beg for. It is either given or not. And if you are not respected, it's time to ask yourself, why are you tolerating this? This story is not about revenge, but about awakening. About how important it is to reclaim control, your worth, and your life. Your comfort, your confidence, your strength. They are in your hands. Don't let anyone take them away from you. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you liked this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.